And we are now live.
Awesome.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Indiewebcamp New Haven. I am Greg McVeary, and I am joined today for the keynote with Kimberly Hirsch. But live and in person, we have David Shansky, and we also have Francette, who is over here. You guys will get to meet throughout the day. And a lot of people dropping in later on the day as we go along. I'm super excited to have a keynote with Kimberly. She is a very active member in the WordPress side of Indiewebcamp, building out her sites, and is currently studying, and I think actually doing her dissertation out in the open on our website in a really fun and interesting way. So it's awesome to have her keynote this event, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So with that, Kimberly, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, great. Hi. So I actually, in lieu of slides, have just added a page to my website that I'm throwing in the IndieWeb chat right now. And then I'm going to do a screen share. And I'll put it in Google Hangouts too, just in case. And, oh, here we go. I will just show you Chrome. And let me see. Now I can see what you're seeing, right? Okay, so if I go here, can you see this connected learning in the IndieWeb thing that I am trying to share with you? Do you see?
Yeah, Kimberly, we see it. I just had my mic and camera muted, but we share.
Okay, perfect. If I go over to look in the Google Hangouts, then I see the Google Hangouts window and I lose the slides. So great, we're in good shape. I'm gonna go ahead and get started then. So I'm gonna talk today about connected learning in the IndieWeb. And if you're not familiar with what that is, I'll explain more about it in a minute. And just a quick overview, I'm just gonna start by introducing myself and then explain connected learning and then throw out some quick ideas about how the IndieWeb might support connected learning. But mostly my goal is to provide you all with enough of an introduction and understanding of what connected learning is, that then as we go into sessions, people can brainstorm further and possibly at future Indieweb camps as well about the relationship between these two things. So, nope, you don't need my address bar. So who am I? I am a former high school Latin teacher and middle school librarian, and I also worked as the public communications specialist for an outreach program at UNC School of Education. And now I am a doctoral student focused on connected learning, specifically in libraries. And as Greg mentioned, I've been sort of documenting a lot of that process on my website and have actually, inspired by this keynote, started doing even more of that, really turning it into an open research notebook. And I've been a web geek, I think, since 1995-ish. I started coding in HTML for Netscape because my dad told me that Prodigy and AOL weren't going anywhere, that it was all going to be on the web, and that's where I should be. And he knew what he was talking about. So I followed his instructions when my mom gave me an HTML book. And I'm also a connected learner myself. But what does that even mean? So I like to think of connected learning as encompassing sort of three components. First, it's a type of learning experience. So in the mid-2000s, some researchers, most prominently Mimi Ito, who's at UC Irvine, I believe, started looking at how young people were using digital technologies and the ways that they were learning, especially the informal learning taking place as they pursued their own interests. And based on that research, she and other scholars have developed the research-based model, which I think of as sort of the second piece of what connected learning is. And I'm going to really dig into that research-based model in a minute. That's sort of the heart of what I'm talking about today. And then from that research-based model, it is a design approach for creating new learning experiences and learning environments. So this is the big picture for connected learning. Connected learning is when a person, and the research tends to focus on adolescents, but it can be an adult, a child, anybody, pursues their interests in relationship with peers and more knowledgeable others, mentors. And then out of that pursuit come opportunities. And where those three things intersect, you will find connected learning. And for me, it's always helpful to have a specific example. So I'm going to talk about myself because it's my favorite thing to do. So I mentioned that as a teenager, I was doing web development, or if you didn't know, in 1995, I was a teenager. And I also was really big into community theater. So my parents took me to rehearsal. They gave me books about web development. They made sure I had what I needed to develop websites. And through working with this one company in particular, I eventually convinced their board of directors that they should have a website and that they should let me build it. So the interest I was pursuing was theater and web design. The relationships were both with my parents and with other people involved with the community theater. And then the opportunities are that this really gave me a chance to have a true purpose for the HTML that I had been learning, rather than just, hello worlding web pages all over the place. And that led me to a career that actually involved HTML in my work. And so I ended up as the public communications specialist at this outreach organization because they needed somebody who knew HTML and who could work in content management systems. And I don't think that I would have done any of that if I hadn't gotten to do this website. So if you go to this page on my site, it will link you out to the Wayback Machine, and you can browse around a really old community theater website that you can see I was really into spatial metaphors when I was doing my first website designs. So that's connected learning as an experience. And you may have noticed, and you can see, I didn't mention earlier, but I've got my speaker notes intermingled in here with the images. But I talked a lot about things that my parents were able to give me and do for me. So my parents could drive me. We had high-speed internet access earlier than a lot of people because my dad's office paid for it so that he could be on call all of the time. He was the director of IT for a law school. So it's a lot easier to do connected learning if you happen to have people who can do things for you and give you things. But the design agenda connected learning is actually equity-oriented and aimed at providing these experiences to non-dominant youth. So people who have been pushed to the margins and may not be able to have those experiences without the support of community organizations or educational organizations like schools and libraries, boys and girls clubs. The design agenda is aimed at helping those institutions provide this kind of learning experience. And so when those institutions are trying to develop an environment where connected learning can happen, there are 4 things that they really need to make sure are present. A sponsorship for youth interest. So for me, I always think about libraries because that's my background. But a librarian can provide mentorship themselves, but they can also connect young people with others. So there's a librarian in my area who started a photography club at the library and recruited a professional photographer to serve as a mentor for those youth. It's a space where people can engage in shared practices, and these might be collaborative or competitive. They might involve activism. They might involve participatory action research, but people are working on something with a shared set of practices for that work and with a shared purpose. In my case, in addition to the website, community theater was always directed at an actual production. So that was a shared purpose I had with everyone else there. And it facilitates connections across settings so that the learner can move what they are learning from one space to another. Like, I can take the HTML that I learn in the community and then use it for work, or even moving across boundaries between face-to-face and online. I can take the writing that I'm doing online and use it to help me in my face-to-face conversations with people. So that's an overview of the IndieWeb. And there's a lot of research behind that I haven't linked here that I'm going to come back and plug in more of later. But I didn't want to take a super long time, so I didn't embellish all of it. But I want to think now about how can the IndieWeb support connected learning. So I want you to think today based on this quick overview and then some resources that we can find online about connected learning more, how we can put the experience of connected learning in the hands of the learner, not just because they're pursuing interests that they like in a space that they feel comfortable, but also in a way that they actually get to maintain ownership of the data they generate in that process and the learning products they create. The original Connected Learning Executive Report, and then this follow-up book, which has come out very recently. It's come out just in January, I think. Both offer examples of connected learning taking place, and the primary environments are silos, sorry, like role-playing sites, forums, and then the two sort of big name ones they mention are Wattpad and Ravelry. And both of those are amazing spaces where you can build beautiful things, but then they live there. So if you were to lose access to those spaces, you wouldn't have the things you made there anymore, or the data that you generated there. And I think the ease of connection in those silos is probably why it's happening there. And so I want us to think about what can we do to facilitate that in spaces that people own themselves. So last night I was running through this talk with my husband. He was like, yeah, that's great. But do you have an example of that and what that would look like? And I said, yes. And then I ran away for 2 hours and left him alone with our child at bedtime, because I realized that fan communities, and especially fan fiction communities, are a great example of a place where we might think about this. So a lot of the research on connected learning looks at fan fiction, and my own research is going to look at cosplay, but there are all kinds of fanish practices involved. And fandom goes to a platform, whether it's MySpace, LiveJournal, or most recently Tumblr, and they will find ways to use it that were not in the original design. And then often the people who own it and run it will create a new piece to their terms of service that shuts down a lot of the activity that fans were there to engage in the first place. And so they have to figure out where to go next and what to do. This happened in December. Fandom is still trying to figure out where is it going to go, because Tumblr changed its terms of service to make essentially not safe for work content unwelcome. And a lot of fan creations fall into that category. And when that happened, that actually happened several months after a fan, Marianne, discovered the Indieweb and talked about it on Tumblr. And then Greg and Chris both sort of responded to her ideas. And then I've also thrown a link here to a post about a fandom platform of the future, where someone was actually having a DM conversation on Twitter with the creator of Pinboard about what it would look like and whether he could build it. And it's such a big thing. It's too big for one person to build. And I'm a fangirl of old. I came into fan sites in like the early aughts, 2000 and 2001. And back then we didn't have those platforms and everything was on our own sites, but it wasn't able to connect in the way that Indieweb tools like Web Mentions and MicroPub have allowed us to really broaden that out. So that's my idea for one example of a place where connected learning is happening, that the Indieweb could really solve some problems and open up some new frontiers. And my thinking is that that environment is one that we can then use to sort of continue to fuel Itches and other communities that we might support. Because I think if you're supporting one connected learning environment, you're going to learn things that then you can use to support others. So that's my spiel and my keynote. And I'm going to stop sharing so you can see my face. And so I can see what people have been talking about in the chat while I was talking at length. So there we go. Thoughts?
All right. Well, yeah. So a couple thoughts. Kimberly, first, thank you so much for doing the keynote. One of the things that I've tried to do as we organize these Indieweb camps is to expand the role of, it takes a lot of time to get places and to be able to travel to New Haven. Like you couldn't just, you have a husband and kid, be able to drop to North Carolina. So I like doing the remote keynotes, and you followed up Mahabali as our last remote keynote in New York. So I want to thank you for doing that here.
Sure.
Really drawn to this idea of the connected learning, because as you know, I was into education and all that spaces in DOO before I came to the Indieweb. And it's interesting because I always make that idea that we're starting off, we're all in the same goal, but starting off at kind of different parts of the map, but towards the same goal. Whereas, Indieweb was, and it had to be way more technical because the tools just really weren't there. But we had all these teachers who were like trying edublogs or like being open, but in a siloed way.
Ning,
exactly. I still have my Ning sites. I forget who ended up, I think which media company ended up buying Ning. But yeah, 2008, NCTE Ning was a phenomenal experience. It was like really 2006, 2008, when a lot of this blew up in the educational spaces. And we were carving out, everybody was hopping on edublogs or blog, because it was for the first time, like parents were allowing kids to use computers.
Yeah.
And that's something you got to remember, like 2005, 2006, where I taught, that was the first time where kids were allowed to get on computers. My AOL instant message status update was always like the homework that was due that night.
Aww.
Yeah. And parents trusted it because I could give kids a blog. In 2005, I could be like, oh, but it was in our CMS. It was, I forget what we used, but one of the big school-based CMSs. But the kids got to be on the threaded discussion board, and they got a blog for the first time. And parents allowed it because it was done through school. And so that's what I'm really, and I think that's kind of my goal looking at 2019 and 2020, is the libraries have always been the place to where we've rooted literacy. We have never taught web literacy. We've never taught kids. We looked at Web 2.0 and said, oh, now nobody needs to learn HTML. And I'm like,
yeah.
10 years later, I'm like, oh man, we got that one way wrong. Because let's go back to that vision, like local news, local libraries. That's always where media and truth and knowledge, things happen civically because you knew the person writing, you knew the person posting because it was on in the church bulletin, or it was in the library bulletin. And I just don't think that the kind of, if we rooted the web not in the corporate interests of Facebook and Instagram, but in local communities, in the local web, and librarians like you, that's what we need to do. Like, why can't I go to my library, check out some space, get a domain, and it gets archived there? Like, and this has always been the way literacy's worked. So I just wanted to leave it with that and let you kind of riff on that for a little bit, because I meant to ask a question and I just ended up almost doing a keynote. So,
oh, okay. The question
is, what would you see of how can we get the Indieweb and the library, kind of the maker movement that's blowing up in libraries across the country, how can we bring those two things together?
That is a good question.
Which was the kind of the talk of your keynote, but if you could do two things today, what would those two things be?
I don't know. I'm trying to think about, what the library landscape is looking like right now, and what's hot and where people are going to talk to each other, because I think that's the piece that is missing. So the American Library Association and Google have this huge Ready to Code initiative that they are sending out. And one of the things that they're really hitting hard is, hey, librarians, you don't need to know how to code to help other people learn how to code, which is sort of what librarians do, is know how to find stuff that they don't know how to do themselves. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what it is to be a librarian. And I think at the same time, for things like the Indieweb, you don't have to, but it's really good if you can model it. And so I think maybe finding, because there are librarians who are already out there sharing things on their own, and they're not just locked into silos, but they actually have websites. So maybe find those people first and say, hey, do you know about the Indieweb? Let me explain it to you. So that might be one thing.
I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah. And I don't know another one. I
know we'll go with this. Just start a homebrew website club in your local library.
Exactly. I think when you said, and why can't it be archived there? I like twitched a little bit because there's a real scope creep in libraries.
Well, not archived there, but even if they were pumping, like they had the API to pump it out to Internet Archive.
Sure, exactly. Or even the know-how to help other people just get their website set up to send it to Internet Archive. So like WordPress, there is a plugin you can just install that will back up all of your new posts to Internet Archive.
But I think this is a huge issue because the local newspapers, up till, I could get everything on microfiche. If you go read, I think there was the Newman Lab actually just came out yesterday, was talking about the fragility of all of the digital newspaper properties and how they're all just disappearing and nothing is being archived anymore.
Yeah.
And that's scary. And now they're their own silos, but like when I think about those local sites and those and how cheap storage is, that's the other thing. Like we're just talking about storage, and I don't live in a city, so it's easier for me to envision this in a town of like 9,000. But say 10% of those people had 2 gigs of space. We could archive that through grants and things. But yeah, I think you're right. Like just teach them how to get it to archived out.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
There is an initiative called Preserve This Podcast. That is exactly what it sounds like it is. It is some archivists working on making sure that podcasters know how to engage in digital preservation so that their stuff isn't lost in time. And I think for lots of digital formats, that would be a really valuable thing to pursue. So they might offer a model that we could look at and think about for other types of digital media.
Yeah, I know since my podcasts are all released in, with either a Creative Commons license or a public domain, I just host them on Internet Archive. I just start there.
Yeah.
But that's hard, like to be able to figure that out. Like I was even teaching somebody else how to do it. I'm like, oh, you just take this web page and then you got to throw it into this to get this link. It was probably too much for a lot of people and he had the skills to do it. It was just making the time to do it. So I think you're right. Like, how can we build these public-facing tools to make archiving easier is a great idea.
Yeah, I think for me, as I was thinking about this keynote and I toyed with some other ideas and I thought about, the things you hear educators say, I think that getting them past that initial hurdle of getting involved is going to be the hardest part. And I also think that we sort of, like a lot of them are going to be, generation 4 indie web users. They want something that just is right there and they can jump right in. And so I think it would be wise to pursue the early adopters in that space who are ready now and then sort of let them move out as evangelists.
Awesome. And, any other questions from the audience for Kimberly or Jack? If you have a question, feel free to unmute and hop in. And if not, we will move into intros. And so any questions, Dave? No. Francine? Francette. All right, Jack, any questions? If you don't unmute, I'm going to assume no. And then Kimberly, I will ask you to kick us off with the intros if you want to share your screen again and just show people your website and tell us, you already told us your name, but just give us a tour and what you're working on or what you want to do next.
Okay. Let me see. Oh my gosh, it's an infinite screen share. Okay, so here's my website, KimberlyHirsch.com. There's no C in Hirsch. It's important to remember because you will go, I don't know where you will go. And it is Indieweb variant of is this the 2016 theme? I don't know, the theme Chris Aldrich uses. Basically, just go to Chris Aldrich's website and look at his site if you want to know where my website is going. That's the long and short of it. So I have an about page on the front, a sidebar with my H card and following. I have some lengthy about stuff, which again, much like Chris, has these other things. And then I've separated out my post kinds into a microblog. And the main thing that I'm working on right now is I'm really thinking about to what extent annotations and marginalia are useful to me to have on my website. So for this presentation, I've got an example here of a bookmark where I put what Raul Pacheco Vega, a great scholar who shares about his academic writing practices, calls synthetic notes, which is just where you read the abstract introduction and conclusion of something and then just write up a quick summary of the context behind the study, the purpose, the methods, and the findings and the significance. And so I started sharing those notes on my site, which previously had just been locked up in Google Drive. And then I have been thinking about, ebooks and annotating those and pulling those out. And really I'm trying to decide like what's worth it in terms of work, what makes sense in terms of attempting automation, and what is even valuable to share, because a lot of times my highlights are tiny little idiosyncratic things that don't have a lot of information without extensive annotation, but I'm not really interested in adding that annotation to them. So that's sort of where I'm at now. Yeah, that's me. And I actually am going to need to go relieve my husband of childcare in a minute.
All right. Well, thanks, Kimberly. I hope you'll, if you're around any other times this weekend, we have the sessions on the books and OER and a lot of library-based sessions. So pop in and out as you're through the weekend and dealing with your the family issues and
all right.
Son. So I will see you soon, and we'll be here all weekend. So talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
All right, up next for our intro, we have David Chansky.
Well, I have not actually even set up a computer, so I'll do what I can here. I am using somebody else's computer, and it has a sticky end, so we'll see what we can figure out.
It's my computer.
I wasn't going to, let's see, cameraman, here we are, screen share. Share your entire window, no. Yeah, I'm going to end up with that infinite thing.
It's okay, you always do.
Yeah. Is it sharing? I can't even tell if it's sharing here.
Screen share?
No, I clicked it.
Yeah, then you usually have to go.
Yeah, it asked. Your entire screen.
Not sharing yet. Still the.
There it is.
Present to everyone.
There we go.
You have to hit this part now.
Okay, I haven't been in one of these in a while, so let me just take that off the screen.
And then take my grade book down, please.
Yes, I don't know.
I should have my grade book closed. You can minimize that.
Can I close it? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, I'm saying I'm not used to them.
No, my grade book is just a bunch of hyperlinks to blogs, so that's how I grade.
Should I save that?
Yeah.
Okay. Some features will be saved.
That's fine.
Yeah. Sorry.
Whoa, it's cool to want to go backwards that way.
Where is the browser on this? Oh, there. Sorry, I'm trying to remember the last.
I know. I'm just having more fun watching you do.
No,
this.
the last time that I used a Macintosh. Probably. No, that's wrong. You're gonna make fun of the fact that I can't remember how to.
No, this is just fun to watch.
Oh,
it's like, what's that movie? Inception.
Inception. Okay.
You're good now.
Yeah, I'm just.
And I plug in my computer.
Okay. So my name is David Chansky. I'm sure we'll auto-complete my name because I'm sure that Greg spends all his time watching my website. Probably not. So this is my website. This is a WordPress site, probably in need of some love, but I'm not a designer, so I do what I can. I do not have posts on the front page. At one time I did, but I have an all posts button as well as some different types of posts. So we'll just go to some of the stuff I've done lately. So there's my site. As you can see, I've taken to noting the weather at the time I posted as an optional thing. There's a photo. I went to a concert, so I posted a photo of it. I went to a burger joint. So I do a lot of things, and I'm also working on trying to do some experimental stuff. So, for example, Quill, which is a micropub client, actually has a form to set up an itinerary. So I made some fake itineraries and styled them. So in the future, if I actually go somewhere on a plane, I could post one of these. It is a real flight, but I was not on it. And of course, I have not posted anything involving eating, but people keep asking me, so I tested it. I didn't eat pizza, nor did I eat soup, but now I'm prepared in the event that in the future I want to eat soup and tell someone about it. So that's pretty much the gist of what I do around here. I do a few other things too, but that seems to work. So I guess I will stop sharing and let somebody else have fun. If I stop screen sharing. There we are. So
I'll go up.
All yours.
Hey, everybody. I am Greg McVeary, and I live at, well, my URL is blank right now. I live at jgregorymcveary.com. So I'm going to go there now, and I want to welcome you all to Indiewebcamp New Haven as I share my screen. And I know I could share just the application window, but I mess it up all the time, just like Dave. And then I will go to my website. So I set my website up a little bit differently. I've been really trying to focus in on accessibility for a while, and I had some of my headers wrong because I had styled an H1 and H2 header to get my blog title, but then that messed it up when I used an H2 on my article title. So I spent some time redoing that and want to really just look into making sure that I'm following best practices in terms of accessibility. The other thing I have been working on is kind of tracing out how I write an article. So I have an article section, and you might see a long article here, where it's written more academic-y. It's, I'll put a little bit more time into it, and it's a longer read. But the way that I get those is I try to document my learning, kind of like what Kimberly was just showing online. If you filter your comments to my bookmarks per se, let me find one I've read a lot of. So I bookmark things as I read them, and if I come across them, I'll start to take notes I will start to annotate. Like, here's an example where I found this article, and then I'd get a block quote, and then so I've been trying to own my annotations this way, and all of this work on agentive writing all came into that article. So I'm really trying to make my reading and writing process be very transparent. But I also had this conversation was like, people like, oh, well, what about, so many people that do different tweet storms or things like that. Well, not just my bookmarks. Sometimes it's just my random thinking. I will go off and I'll try to connect them all through web mentions. And that will be, so if I could go through assessment, for example, I might just connect a bunch of posts together. I'm looking for an example and I can't find one off the top of my head, where I try to string together a long number of posts. So here you are. So if I can find the start of this one, it's still going. You're seeing the one comment here. So I'm making a string of posts that are linked together through the web mentions, which really kind of connect a chain for my writing, which I can then go back on my website, and then that gets folded into my articles. So that's how I've been making that transparency for my students. And then the other thing I've been doing on my homepage is publishing, and you can see here, notice how that's shifted. I still have to fix a couple things here and there with my style sheets. I post different kinds of feeds, but also my poetry feeds lately, because I've been writing a lot of poetry. So, here's this is just a improv poem where I use Peach of Flicker, and I was given 2 words to define poetry: goblet and research. And then so I throw those into Peach of Flicker, and then just have to riff on a poem for about 5 minutes. And then I have other kinds of, there's a change of season haiku, different poems that I link to here. This is one on rhizomatic learning and Amy Burvall's idea of you need constraints, that you don't want to just give learners absolute freedom, that creativity works best with a little bit of constraints. So, just trying to keep track of my poetry and play with different words. This was you had to define, this was a challenge to define a poem in 1 line. So I literally turned it into a 1 line, playing with this idea of literal and metaphorical languages. So just trying to go through and have fun with poems as I do it for my website. So that's me, and I think we're going to hand it off next to either Chris or Jack, to who wants to go next. So let me stop my screen share. All right. It looks like Chris unmuted, so I'll pass it off to him.
I can give it a shot. Let me share my screen here.
If you're awake, sorry. There's one, like, it's got to be pretty early your time.
Yeah, good morning from the West Coast. Although, you know, I was talking to chatting at somebody last night in Australia in hopes that they may join us. Let's see. So good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Aldrich of bafosacco.com. Can you see a screen there, possibly? I'll presume you can.
Yep, you can see it.
So like Greg, I try to own everything, including all the chickens. So I have a chicken post type on my website just for fun, because you can. So all my chicken posts are kept naturally in a chicken feed. But probably more entertaining, we can jump. I listened to a podcast a while back called EduTalk. So I thought I would show off this morning. It was this episode was talking about a WordPress conference that's going to be held online entirely on Twitter. So all the presenters are going to present their talks as tweets. But I thought, well, you know, if it's an online conference, even if it's on Twitter and everybody's talking about WordPress, why don't they do their conference talk about whatever they're doing and own it all on their own site and send it to Twitter? So kind of as a version, I've posted that I listened to this particular podcast, and then I tweeted it out and sent a copy to Twitter. And then I took all the responses, came back from Twitter to the comment section on my site. So I mentioned I might do a presentation, and then one of the organizers says I have until Monday, and then mentioned a few things. So then there's a back and forth conversation between my website and folks on Twitter that goes back and forth. So you can see on all of these, there's a little indicator that the conversation's coming back from Twitter. This one actually needs a syndication indicator that shows that I sent it to Twitter, although I obviously did because I'm here getting a conversation back. So if we let's click on one of these, and it should take us to that portion of the tweet stream, which I think is kind of cool. So I can have a two-way thread of conversation between my own website and Twitter, which honestly I think is a pretty cool thing. That doesn't matter where I want to have the conversation, but I can interact with everyone else. So, you know, that's one of the. It's not a new thing on my side. I've been doing this for a couple of years, but I think it's one of the most impressive and happy things I am about what my website does. So we'll stop there. And I think Jack is next.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Jameson. My website is jackjameson.net. I'm just going to see if I can get the screen share going. Hold on one moment. So I'm assuming you can see my website here. So I'm using the same theme as David and Chris, and I think a very popular WordPress theme for IndieWeb, the IW26. And I found recently, I don't tend to post very much on my website. You can see I don't scroll back till I'm, 2 months ago. So I make very few posts. So I'm trying to rethink how to organize my website to focus a little more on the kind of longer term things. I'm probably listing off some of the projects I'm working on, and better list of my publications and things like that. But what I'm really excited about that I've been working on for some time and chipping away at is Microsub server plugin. So I take care of all of my subscriptions to all the sites I'm following through a plugin running on my own server, and then can view whatever my subscriptions are in any Microsoft client like Monocle or Together, etc. As you can see, I've just pulled up the dashboard here, and you can see it has this kind of very ugly interface that is at least functional, but very, very ugly. So what I'm excited to be working on, I'm slowly chipping away at, is making a much cleaner and more straightforward interface, which I've just pulled up. So this is one of the things, hopefully, I can make some progress on, and maybe get that finished over this weekend. So I think that's it for me, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jack. We were kind of really excited to see how far you've gotten with the ARM. So we're really looking forward to taking and watching what that's going next. And I think we have a couple more people here in person, but they're not going to intro today. But they're excited. And Chris, they're excited because I actually met somebody when I was picking up breakfast today, and they are working on their own book and want to build an author's page so that they can get the book out to different publishers. And I said, oh, yeah, well, you're going to be in the right place this weekend. So they're going to be joining us, and we'll be talking a lot about books this weekend. We'll be talking a lot about different OER and library resources and bringing Indieweb to the library. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to start planning the sessions in a little bit. Thank you, Dave. We finally found the thermostat in a very hot room. That probably doesn't do anything. So we're going to go. We'll be back online in about 10 minutes to then start doing the grid board. And we're going to try to leave some of the later spots for, we know we have a lot of West Coast remote interest. So we're going to try to leave some spots later in the day for some West Coast times for people who may not be up yet during the session grid building part of the day. So that's it. We will be back online in about 15 minutes. I will talk to you guys soon. I'm just going to stop the broadcast now.